In 1954, three American scientists at Bell Labs invented something that would power the future. Today, America makes just 1% of it. China, they make 80%. This is the story of how America lost a $160 billion industry it created. April 25, 1954, Murray Hill, New Jersey. Bell Laboratories, the same place that gave us the transistor and the laser, unveils the world's first practical silicon solar cell. Scientists Darrell Chapin, Calvin Fuller, and Gerald Pearson demonstrate their invention by powering a radio transmitter with nothing but sunlight. Efficiency, 6%. But it worked. It was revolutionary. America had just invented the technology that would eventually become a $160 billion global industry. The New York Times called it the beginning of a new era, leading eventually to the realization of one of mankind's most cherished dreams, the harnessing of the almost limitless energy of the sun. They had no idea how right they were, or how catastrophically wrong it would go for America. For decades, the United States dominated solar innovation. We led the research. We held the patents. We manufactured the panels that powered satellites, remote telecommunications, and the first wave of renewable energy installations. By the year 2000, we were still on top. Then everything collapsed. Fast forward to the year 2000. America is still leading. We manufacture 22% of the world's solar panels. Companies like BP Solar, Solar World Americas, and Evergreen Solar are household names in the industry. By 2025, that number has plummeted to somewhere between 1 and 2% of global production. Let me put that in perspective. In 2024 alone, China installed approximately 300 gigawatts of solar capacity. That's more than twice what the entire rest of the world installed combined. To give you a sense of scale, 300 gigawatts is enough to power roughly 75 million American homes. China now controls over 80% of every single stage of solar manufacturing, from polysilicon production to ingots, wafers, cells, and finished modules. It's not just assembly, they own the entire supply chain. The companies, LONGi Green, Energy, 150 gigawatts of production capacity, more than the entire annual global demand just a decade ago. Jinko Solar, 130 gigawatts of capacity. Trina Solar shipped over 32 gigawatts in just the first half of 2024. Jwei Solar, another 32 gigawatts in the same period. Each of these companies ships more solar panels in a single quarter than all American manufacturers combined ship in an entire year. Meanwhile, what happened to American manufacturers? The graveyard is long and devastating. Solyndra received $535 million in federal loan guarantees, bankrupt by 2011. The FBI raided their offices. It became a political scandal that haunted clean energy policy for years. Evergreen Solar, once based in Massachusetts, they couldn't compete with Chinese pricing, closed their U.S. factory in 2011, filed for bankruptcy the same year. BP Solar, one of the early giants, closed all U.S. manufacturing facilities in 2011. Solar World Americas filed for bankruptcy in 2017 after a decades-long fight against Chinese competition. Helios USA shuttered. Suniva filed for bankruptcy in 2017, then sparked a major trade case that led to tariffs, which we'll get to. SunPower, once America's flagship solar manufacturer, known for the highest efficiency panels in the world, filed for bankruptcy in August 2024. Meyer Burger. Here's the most recent tragedy. This Swiss company decided to bet on America. They opened a brand new, state-of-the-art heterojunction solar cell facility in Goodyear, Arizona. $1 billion invested. The technology was cutting edge. The panels were among the most efficient in the world. But by late 2024, less than a year after opening, they announced they were shutting it down. All 282 employees received termination notices. The reason? They couldn't compete with Chinese manufacturers selling panels at or below cost. Today, First Solar stands virtually alone as America's only major profitable domestic solar manufacturer. They are projecting approximately $5 billion in revenue for 2025, which sounds impressive until you realize China's solar industry generated over $160 billion in 2025, one company, versus an entire nation-state industrial complex. So, what happened? How do you lose an industry you invented? How do you go from 22% global market share to 1% in just 25 years? The answer comes down to 3 strategic decisions and $50 billion. Decision number 1, China went all in. With massive state support, between 2011 and 2023, Chinese solar manufacturers received over $50 billion in direct government subsidies. That's not a typo. $50 billion. This wasn't just financial support. It was industrial warfare disguised as clean energy policy. These subsidies reduced Chinese manufacturing costs by up to 30% compared to competitors operating without state backing. But the strategy went much deeper than just writing checks. China also provided below-market loans from state-owned banks, free or heavily subsidized land for factory construction, artificially low electricity rates for energy-intensive manufacturing, export incentives to flood global markets, coordinated capacity expansion across the entire supply chain. But here's where it gets truly strategic. China dominates 95% of the world's polysilicon production, the raw material that becomes solar panels. And where is most of it made? Xinjiang province. Why Xinjiang? Because it's right next to massive coal-powered plants that provide dirt-cheap electricity. The irony is almost poetic. The raw material for clean energy is being produced using some of the dirtiest coal power on the planet. The cost to produce a solar module in China? Approximately 15 cents per watt. In the United States? At least 25 to 30 cents per watt. And that's with recent improvements. That cost gap is insurmountable for companies operating in competitive markets. You simply cannot compete against a state-backed competitor that has systematically lowered every input cost across a vertically integrated supply chain. Decision number 2. America chose. Deployment over manufacturing. Here's where American policy made a critical miscalculation. In the 2000s and 2010s, U.S. energy policy focused almost exclusively on deploying solar, not manufacturing it. The logic seemed sound at the time. Get solar panels installed as quickly as possible, drive down costs through scale, fight climate change, and let market forces determine where production happens. Tax credits, subsidies, and renewable energy mandates went to companies installing cheap Chinese panels, not to companies building American factories. The investment tax credit, which became one of the most successful clean energy policies in U.S. history, made solar economically attractive for homeowners and utilities, but it didn't care where the panels came from. The result? We effectively subsidized our own manufacturing industry's collapse. Every rooftop solar installation using a Chinese panel was another nail in the coffin of American manufacturing. Between 2011 and 2018, dozens of U.S. solar manufacturers closed their doors. In 2017 alone, the U.S. solar industry lost 9,800 jobs, ending a 7-year growth streak. Meanwhile, installation jobs grew. By 2025, there are approximately 280,000 solar jobs in the United States, but the vast majority are in sales, installation, and project development, not manufacturing. We became a nation of solar panel installers, buying our equipment from China. Decision number 3, the trade tariff experiment that backfired. Starting in 2012, frustrated by the collapse of American manufacturers, the U.S. government imposed tariffs on Chinese solar panels, reaching as high as 250% in some cases. Did it work? Not even close. China simply moved production to Taiwan, Malaysia, Vietnam, and Thailand. Chinese companies opened factories in these countries, often with the same ownership structures, same supply chains, same everything, just a different flag on the building. By 2024, 75% of solar cells and modules in the U.S. market were still imported. The tariffs raised prices for American consumers and installers, making solar more expensive and slowing adoption, but they didn't bring manufacturing back. Then came the next wave of tariffs, and the next. Each time, Chinese manufacturers found a workaround. The most recent development? In 2025, the U.S. tightened tariff enforcement on solar products from Southeast Asia, specifically targeting what trade officials called circumvention, Chinese companies using third countries to dodge tariffs. But enforcement is incredibly difficult. How do you track a supply chain where the polysilicon comes from Xinjiang, gets turned into wafers in Malaysia, cells in Vietnam, and modules in Thailand, all coordinated by a Chinese parent company? You can't. Not effectively. The tariffs became a game of whack-a-mole that American trade officials were destined to lose. Let's talk about what $50 billion in subsidies and strategic industrial planning actually means on the ground, for real people with real jobs. In 2023, Meyer Burger, that Swiss company I mentioned, announced ambitious plans to build a high-tech solar manufacturing facility in Goodyear, Arizona. They promised cutting-edge heterojunction technology, American jobs, and a panel that could compete with anything China produced. Local officials celebrated. Workers were hired. The factory opened in 2024. The technology worked. The panels were excellent, among the highest efficiency ratings in the world. The workers were skilled. The factory was modern. But by late 2024, less than 12 months after opening, it was over. Meyer Burger announced the facility would close. All 282 workers received termination notices. The reason? They couldn't compete with Chinese manufacturers selling panels at or below cost. Manufacturers propped up by those government subsidies, cheap electricity, and a coordinated national strategy. One of the laid-off engineers told reporters, "We built the best solar panels in America, and it didn't matter." That sentence should haunt every policymaker in Washington. It's not that American workers aren't skilled. It's not that American technology isn't advanced. It's that we're asking companies to fight a market war against an opponent backed by the full force of a nation-state industrial policy. And we're shocked when they lose. In 2024, residential solar installations in the U.S. fell 31%. Major companies like SunPower, Sunnova, and Mosaic Solar tumbled into bankruptcy or severe financial distress, not because solar doesn't work, not because demand disappeared, not because the technology failed, because the manufacturing base that could support a truly American solar industry wasn't in America anymore. It was across the Pacific, vertically integrated, state-subsidized, and utterly dominant. But here's where the story gets even more complex and more urgent for 2025. When the U.S. imposed tariffs on Chinese solar panels, China didn't just accept defeat, they evolved. The Southeast Asia shell game, Chinese solar companies, Longi, Trina, Jinko Solar, began opening new factories in Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, and Cambodia. On paper, these are Vietnamese or Thai companies. They have local registrations, local workers doing final assembly. But look closer. The polysilicon? Still from Xinjiang, China. The wafers? Processed in China. The solar cells? Often made in China, then shipped to Southeast Asia for final module assembly. The ownership? Chinese parent companies or joint ventures with controlling stakes held by Chinese firms. The technology and equipment? Chinese-made and operated. What's happening is minimal value-added activity in Southeast Asia, just enough to slap a Made in Vietnam label on the box, while 90% of the actual manufacturing and value creation still happens in China. In 2024, Malaysia became the #1 source of U.S. solar panel imports, shipping over 15 gigawatts. Vietnam wasn't far behind. Thailand surged. But U.S. Customs and Border Protection began investigating. In 2025, they determined that several major importers were engaging in what's called circumvention, deliberately routing Chinese products through third countries to dodge tariffs. The result? New penalties, new enforcement actions, new tariffs. But here's the problem. Every time the U.S. closes one loophole, another opens. Chinese companies have the capital, the relationships, and the supply chain flexibility to stay one step ahead. Meanwhile, American companies trying to build domestic manufacturing are stuck playing by the rules while their competitors exploit every gray area in international trade law. The 2025 trade dilemma. As of right now, U.S. policymakers face an impossible choice. Option A, tighten tariffs and enforcement even further. Risk, solar panel prices spike, solar adoption slows, climate goals suffer, and installers lose jobs. Option B, relax enforcement to keep solar affordable. Risk, the few remaining American manufacturers collapse entirely, and we become permanently dependent on Chinese supply chains. There's no good answer. Both options involve pain. And now we need to talk about something the solar industry would prefer you didn't know. Remember Xinjiang province, where 95% of the world's polysilicon is made? Xinjiang is also where the Chinese government has detained over 1 million Uyghur Muslims and other ethnic minorities in what the U.S. State Department and multiple human rights organizations have documented as forced labor camps. In 2021, the U.S. Department of Labor released a report concluding that solar supply chains are highly dependent on polysilicon from Xinjiang, and that this polysilicon is highly likely to be produced using forced labor. Let that sink in for a moment. The solar panels being installed on American homes, schools, and government buildings, panels marketed as the solution to climate change, the symbol of clean energy, may have been made using slave labor. In June 2021, the U.S. banned imports of polysilicon from specific companies in Xinjiang linked to forced labor. In 2022, the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act went further, creating a rebuttable presumption that any product from Xinjiang is made with forced labor unless proven otherwise. But enforcement is nearly impossible. Supply chains are opaque. Polysilicon from multiple sources gets mixed together. Chinese manufacturers rarely disclose sourcing. Even when they do, auditing is difficult or blocked by the Chinese government. So here's the moral paradox. You want to fight climate change by installing solar panels. But those panels might be made with forced labor. Do you delay clean energy deployment while we figure out ethical sourcing? Or do you accept the compromise and deal with supply chain issues later? There's no easy answer. Some American companies have tried to source clean polysilicon from non-Xinjiang sources. But with China controlling 95% of global production, alternatives are limited and expensive. This is the uncomfortable truth the solar industry doesn't advertise. The clean energy transition, as currently structured, may be built on exploitation. Let's zoom out and look at the full picture, because when you see all the numbers together, the scale of what happened becomes undeniable. Global Solar Manufacturing Control, 2025. China, 80% of all stages, polysilicon, ingots, wafers, cells, modules. United States 5 to 8%, mostly final assembly with imported components. Rest of world 12 to 17%, mostly South Korea, Germany, and emerging factories in India. Installation capacity, China, 2024. 300 gigawatts installed, 55% of global additions. United States, 2024. 50 gigawatts installed. China installed 6 times more than the U.S., despite having roughly the same population. Solar jobs, United States, 2025. Approximately 280,000 total solar jobs. But manufacturing jobs? Fewer than 20,000. Most are in installation, sales, and project development. China employs an estimated 3 million people across solar manufacturing. The revenue gap, China's solar panel manufacturing revenue, 2025. $160 billion U.S. solar manufacturing revenue, under $10 billion. First Solar, America's biggest. Approximately $5 billion, respectable, but dwarfed by the Chinese industry market concentration. The top 25 solar manufacturers shipped 687 gigawatts of panels in 2024, all but 3 or 4. Chinese companies or Chinese-backed joint ventures. And here's the kicker, the twist that makes this story even stranger. Despite producing more solar panels than anyone else on Earth, China's top 4 manufacturers, Longji, Jinko Solar, Trina Solar, and JA Solar posted combined losses of over $1.5 billion in the first half of 2024. Why? Overcapacity. China built so much production capacity, driven by state mandates, subsidies, and coordinated industrial policy, that global prices collapsed by nearly 50% between 2022 and 2024. They're selling panels at or below cost. From a business perspective, it's insane. From a strategic perspective, it's brilliant. Because here's what happens. When prices collapse, every competitor who doesn't have a government backstop goes bankrupt. American startups die. European manufacturers shut down. Even Chinese companies struggle, but the ones with state support survive. And when the dust settles, China controls even more of the market. That's not a free market. That's industrial strategy playing out over decades. So, is America just going to accept this? Are we going to permanently cede an industry we invented? Not without a fight. In August 2022, President Biden signed the Inflation Reduction Act, the most significant climate and industrial policy legislation in U.S. history. Buried in its 737 pages were billions of dollars in tax credits, grants, and incentives specifically designed to rebuild American solar manufacturing. The results have been dramatic. U.S. solar manufacturing capacity grew fourfold, from around 10 gigawatts in 2022 to over 50 gigawatts in early 2025. New factories opened across the country. Q-Cells expanded in Georgia. First Solar announced a fifth U.S. factory in Louisiana, adding 3.7 gigawatts of annual production capacity. Hanwha Q-Cells committed to building a complete vertically integrated solar supply chain in the U.S. Canadian Solar, Meyer Burger, before their closure. And even Jinko Solar, a Chinese company, opened U.S. facilities. By some estimates, over $100 billion in solar manufacturing investments were announced following the IRA. It looked like a renaissance. But there are three major problems. Problem 1, component dependency. Many of these American-made panels still rely heavily on Chinese components. The solar cells, wafers, and even some of the specialized chemicals and equipment still imported from China. We're doing final assembly in America, which is better than nothing, but it's not true supply chain independence. Problem 2, speed. China didn't build their solar dominance overnight. It took 20 years of coordinated policy. America is trying to catch up in 3 to 5 years. That's not enough time to build the supplier networks, train the workforce, and develop the institutional knowledge needed for true competitiveness. Problem 3, political uncertainty. The Inflation Reduction Act passed on a party line vote. What happens if the political winds shift? Will the next Congress gut the subsidies? Will tariffs change again? Manufacturers need 15 to 20 years of policy certainty to justify building multi-billion-dollar factories. America has a track record of changing direction every 4 to 8 years. Chinese manufacturers, operating under an authoritarian government with 5-year plans that actually stick, have certainty. American manufacturers have hope and anxiety. So, here's where we are in 2025. America invented the solar panel 70 years ago at Bell Labs. We walked away from manufacturing it because we believed in free markets and global supply chains. China picked it up, subsidized it to the tune of $50 billion, scaled it beyond anything the world had ever seen, and now dominates it so completely that even they're losing money on it. American policymakers are now trying to build the industry back, factory by factory, subsidy by subsidy, tariff by tariff. But we're not just competing against Chinese companies. We're competing against the Chinese state, a coordinated industrial policy backed by unlimited cheap capital, vertical integration from raw materials to finished products, and a willingness to lose money for years just to maintain market dominance. Can we win that fight? Maybe. The Inflation Reduction Act is real. American manufacturing capacity is growing. First Solar is profitable and expanding. New technologies like perovskite solar cells and tandem architectures might give American innovators another chance to lead. But it's going to take more than a few factories and tax credits. It's going to require a level of strategic commitment, government, industry, labor, and capital working together, that America hasn't shown since the Apollo program put a man on the moon. It's going to require asking hard questions. Are we willing to pay more for solar panels made under fair labor conditions? Are we willing to accept slower climate progress if it means building domestic supply chains? Are we willing to use the full force of trade law, even if it means conflict with China and higher costs for consumers? And most importantly, do we have the political stamina to stick with an industrial policy for 20 years, not just until the next election? Because that's what it took China, 20 years of consistency. In 1954, those three scientists at Bell Labs showed that sunlight could power our future. In 2025, that future is being built in China, often by workers who may not be there by choice, using coal power to make clean energy, and sold at prices that defy economic logic. The question isn't whether America can rebuild this industry. The question is whether we will, and whether we're willing to do what it actually takes. The solar panels on your roof, check where they were made, then ask yourself, is this the future we want?